Well, there you go. So eat brisket. That's what you should do. I just want to put that out there for you. You could also add to that Whataburger. Eat that at all costs. Do it whenever you can. Yeah, exactly. Amen. 100%. Right? Yeah. Hey, today, if you don't know, my name is Josh. I'm the pastor here at Church on the Drive. I'm glad that you're here with us, whether you're here in the room or participating online. You're here on a great day because we're kicking off a brand new series called Do's and Don'ts. Do's and don'ts, because I'm pretty sure if you're anything like me, you've heard this at some point in your life. You're talking to somebody about faith, religion, something like that. You've probably heard somebody say something like this in your life. I don't like religion. I don't like the whole Christianity. I don't do church. I don't do any of that stuff because it's all just a list of do's and don'ts. Just do's and don'ts. Just a bunch of rules, a bunch of regulations, a bunch of things that they make up to try to keep people in line. Right? Maybe you've heard somebody go along this line of thinking before where they said, hey, you're just making up rules to keep people in their spot. And so the people who have the power stay in power. The people who don't have the power, they keep not having the power. It's just a bunch of do's and don'ts, and I either do or do not feel like it applies to me in some way. And so ultimately, what you end up asking yourself, and what we're going to be asking ourselves throughout the entire summer is this, like, what do Jesus followers do with the do's and don'ts of the Bible? Because if you were talking to somebody and they say, hey, look, it's just a lot of do's and don'ts, they could easily open up the Bible and point some stuff out to you and say, look, here's a do, here's a don't, here's a thou shalt not. And you turn the page, look, here's some more. There's a bunch of rules, bunch of things that you're supposed to be doing or not doing. What do you say to that? And if it were me, I'd say, well, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. There are a bunch of things in there that say you should be living this way. You should be doing this thing. You should not be doing this thing. You should not be doing this. And so we want to ask, well, why? Why do we adhere to these, but we don't adhere to these over here? The whole thing sort of reminds me of when I was in high school. And I don't know when the last time you were in high school was. For me, it was like 7 years ago. And so it's just 7 years ago. So, I'm really young. I look old for my age and that whole thing. I remember being in high school. And when you're in high school, maybe you remember the same feeling. You're grown. You know everything. And mom and dad don't know anything. And your teachers don't know anything either. Sound familiar? All the high school students, yeah, absolutely. No, we felt like we were grown, like we knew stuff. We needed to be trusted with a little more, freedom. Give us a little bit of slack. Give me a little bit of room to make my own decisions, to run a little bit. Let me off the hook a little bit. But no. You go to school, and what do they got for you? Do's and don'ts, rules and regulations. You got to go here. I mean, think if it's been a while since you've been in high school or middle school, just remember this. At one point, you had to raise your hand to ask if you could go to the bathroom. Like, if you had to ask to go to the restroom now, that'd be the weirdest thing ever, yeah, as an adult. But in high school, you're doing that sort of thing. And I remember feeling in high school going, why do I have to raise my hand and ask in front of everybody if I can go to the restroom? Only to potentially be told no. Some of the rules and some of the things I understood, right? Like, you can't do this, but you can do that. I understood some of those, but some of them, they didn't make a lot of sense to me. Didn't make a lot of sense to me or my friends. And so what I found was in high school, generally you had one of three type of people. So one was you had the rule followers, the ones who were going to follow the rules, who were going to do all the stuff, and they were going to do whatever was asked of them. They were going to abide by the rules, because that's how some of us are wired. We're wired that way as rule followers. And then there's another group of people, the ones who never follow the rules. The ones who say they see a rule and they go, no, I'm not doing that. No, just because you said I need to go right, I'm going to go left instead. The rebels. The rebels without a cause, those people. And then you got this third group of people, which I think is usually pretty large, a little bit larger. It's the people who want to give the appearance that they're a rule follower, but really and truly, they're pushing the line. They're pushing the envelope every chance they get. They give the appearance that, hey, I'm a rule follower, and everybody goes, oh, man, that's such a great kid. But they're really pushing the envelope every chance they get. Maybe I can get away with this. Maybe I can't get away with this. We'll see. They push it until somebody says something. And even then, they might still do it a little bit. when I was about 16, 17 years old, I played a lot of baseball. Baseball was my main sport in high school. And as part of the baseball culture in the area I'm from, you had to put a dip in your mouth to get out there and play sometimes. It was just kind of in the culture. And so that's what we did. In fact, most of the men that I grew up around, like grown men in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, like they all had a pinch of Copenhagen up in that mouth. And so I always loved that smell for some reason. So for me, it was like a natural transition. I get into high school, and at that time, where I was from, at 16 years old was the age you could buy tobacco products. So like you just started driving a car and you go and it's like, hey, let me get a can of Copenhagen. Like nobody batted an eye. In fact, they'd probably give it to you beforehand. And so we go in there, we get our stuff, and before you get out on the diamond, right, you just put that thing in there. Sometimes before you're walking around school, put it in there, just because, you were grown. But also because the rules of the school said you can't do that. Right? Social rules said, yeah, go for it, whatever. Legality, it was fine. But the school, no way. There are big signs all over the place. No tobacco, no alcohol, no drugs, no this. Right? We just skipped the first rule. That didn't apply to us. We're from Texas. We can have all the tobacco we want. Right? So we'd be walking around school and doing that, trying to hide it from the security officers and all of those things. One day we had to go to school late. For what it was a late start for us that day. And we showed up, after getting some breakfast tacos, we showed up and we had to go straight to lunch. So as we're getting out of the car, we all put our mandatory dip in. And lest you think I am advocating for tobacco usage among teenagers or anybody, let me just tell you two things. Number one, I'm not. Number two, you're about to see why not, okay? So we head straight to lunch with the Copenhagen in our mouth, and I'm walking up, and it was spaghetti day. I'll never forget it, because I look down, and I see everybody having spaghetti, and there's a breadstick, and I go, man, I'm not really that hungry. I don't really care that much about spaghetti, but I do want that breadstick. And so somebody goes, I don't want my breadstick. Would you like to have it? And I said, absolutely. I would love to have your breadstick. Thank you very much. I got about 3/4 of the way through that delicious garlic breadstick when I realized that pinch of snuff was gone. And it wasn't on the plate in front of me or anywhere else. Now, any of you who've ever dabbled, I'm not going to ask you to look around, any of you who've ever dabbled with the old tobacco there, you swallow some Copenhagen, you're about to be violently ill. And boy, howdy. Right? So I swallowed this by accident, and I went, guys, I got to go. And I went straight to the locker room, because I knew things are not going to be great. And they were even worse than I could have imagined. I will spare you the gory details, but I will just suffice to say, I'm a bit of a germaphobe, and I ended up on the ground, shirtless, trying to feel the cool of the disgusting locker room floor, because I had been so violently ill for about 35 minutes. Don't put a pinch of dip in, boys, right? And girls, don't do that. Don't do that. It was good. And it was in that moment I had a realization that day. I had a realization. Some rules are good rules. Some guidelines are good guidelines. Some things like that are good for us, man. They're good rules. And just like high schoolers and their rules that they got to follow or may not want to follow, and the different types of people that fall into those things, just like we all have experienced that, I think we've all experienced different types of friends, and even maybe ourselves, where there's 3 different types of people. One who, when it comes to the rules and stuff of the Bible, the do's and don'ts of the Bible, who are absolute rule followers, right? They're what they would call themselves believers, and they say, I'm a rule follower. I'm doing every little thing it says. And then there's others who are not believers or who are just rebels, and they go, I'm not doing anything that thing says. I don't need those rules. I don't need those do's and don'ts. I don't know why anybody would listen to that. Religion's the opiate of the masses, like all that. And then you got a third group of people who I think is a little bit larger, who say, I think that we should follow these as long as it suits me. I think we should follow these things as long as it suits me and what I want to do. And if I don't want to do, well, I'll see what I can get away with and see what I can not do. But let's be honest. I think that these rules, I think that these do's and these don'ts, we need them. Like, it just takes a look at society, right? Like, just take a quick look at society. There's a level of necessity that comes with rules and with do's and don'ts, because without them, society starts to fall apart a little bit, doesn't it? I mean, if we all just did whatever we wanted to do, whenever we wanted to do it, things might not go so well. We've got to have some level of do's and don'ts. And that's why when God started this whole process of reconciling humanity back to God, do's and don'ts were at the start of all of that. You may remember the story of the people of Israel. They were enslaved in Egypt. God had made a promise to Abraham, and then Abraham's descendants, he said, look, I'm going to bless you, and everybody who comes after you, you're going to be my people. And then some of those people found themselves enslaved. And then eventually a few more of those people found themselves enslaved in Egypt. And then all of them found themselves enslaved in the land of Egypt. And I'm sure many of them had heard the story about how God was going to bless them and they were going to be God's people. And they were like, what's going on here? What's going on, God? And they cried out to God for years and years and years. God, send us a deliverer. Send somebody to help us. Send somebody to make this thing happen. And God did. God sent a guy named Moses. And Moses walked into Pharaoh's kingly chamber. And he said, hey, listen, you need to let my people, the Israelites, go, or something bad's going to happen. And Pharaoh, who believed that he was the God of the area, that he was the guy, he believed that everybody needed to listen to him at all costs. He was the guy. He had total power. Looked at him and said, not a chance. Get out. Well, if you know the story, you know that 10 plagues followed after that. And every time a plague hit, Moses would go to Pharaoh and say, Pharaoh, let my people go. Let my people go, or there's going to be something else happen. And Pharaoh said, no. Eventually, Pharaoh relents. He says, fine, it's too much. Get out of here. Right? All these plagues, by the way, are sent by the Israelite God. So really what's going on here, if you're in that ancient Near Eastern mode, what you need to understand is what's going on is a battle of religion at the same time. It's not just a battle of wills. It's not a political thing as much as it is a religious, spiritual, divine battle seen between Pharaoh and the Egyptian gods, of whom Pharaoh was a god too, and the God of this enslaved group called Israel. And finally, Pharaoh says, just fine, you win. Get out of here. Get out of here. And Israel makes its way out with hundreds, thousands of them headed out. They'd all been enslaved before. Now imagine that they are out there trying to figure this out. They've been enslaved for hundreds of years. Other people telling them what to do over and over and over again. They have all the rules, all the regulations set for them. It's not necessarily their cultural rules, but they have abided by them. And so now they're trying to figure out, how do they live? Maybe even better question is, what structure do we have? What kind of political structure? What kind of governmental structure do we have? How does this work? We've been enslaved. We've been hit with whips and told to make bricks for years. What do we do now? They needed a little bit of instruction. I mean, imagine if all of us in this room, if we suddenly were transported to an island, had everything we needed, had all the food we needed, had all the water we needed, like it wasn't some deserted remote thing, but we were just there, isolated. We would have to figure out a structure. We'd have to determine who's in charge, and because sometimes decisions have to be made. We'd have to figure out how decisions got made. We'd need a little bit of direction too, wouldn't we? That's what's going on with the people of Israel. And so God gives them a little bit of direction. And he starts off by communicating to them through Moses two big things. The first is, hey, I'm the God who got you out of Egypt. I'm the God who loves you. I'm the God of Abraham. I'm the God who chose you. I'm the God who wants you free. And I'm the God who made it happen. Nobody else could. Nobody else would. It was just me. Because, and here's the second thing, you are my chosen people. I want you to be my chosen people. So if you're going to be my chosen people, what that means is you have to be holy like I am holy. Now, we get hung up on that word a lot, but all holy means, especially in Hebrew, is set apart, different, distinct. There's something different. So if God says, look, I'm different than all these gods out there. I'm set apart. I'm different. You are my set apart people. You are my set apart people. You can't look and smell and act and be like everybody else out there. You've got to be my people. There has to be something distinct about you. There has to be distinctions there. And so he goes about telling them exactly what those distinctions are. And he does that in Exodus chapter 20. I want to read some of that with you. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 2, he says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I'm the Lord your God. I'm that God. I'm the one. I'm the one that talks with Abraham. I'm the one that promised things to Abraham. I'm that God. Remember when I brought you out of Egypt, there was no way it could have happened, but I made it happen with 10 plagues, and then I parted waters, and you walked across a seabed on dry ground because I made it happen? I'm that God. Now, I'm sorry if that seems a little bit repetitive because I just talked to you about it, but I really want you to understand this is the foundational thing of everything to come after it. This is the foundation of all of it. Because what he says next is grounded in this. He says on, you shall have no other gods before me. Well, that makes sense. That makes sense. If you're the only God who would love them enough to get them out of Egypt, out of slavery, why would they serve anyone else? If you're the only one who could have made this happen, who would make this happen, why would they serve anyone else? If you're the God, that had a compact, a communion with Abraham, their ancestor, why would they try to make a covenant with anybody else? You shall have no other gods before me. Now, to our 21st century ears, a lot of times that can be a little weird. Because we're accustomed to thinking, hey, there's only one God out there. There can only possibly be one God. But in reality, there are millions of people around the world who still hold to the idea of a multiplicity of gods, thousands of gods. And pretty much everybody in this day, with the ancient Israelites, they believed the exact same thing, that there were many, many gods out there. And what they would do is they would pick and choose which gods they served based on how those gods had rewarded or served them. So many of them would have their local deity that they loved and thought was theirs, right? And so they would come up in battle against another group, another civilization or city-state. And when they came up in battle, what many of them honestly believed was that there was this divine battle royale taking place. And so that the civilization that came in and defeated the other civilization, well, their God got worshipped, and the God of the defeated civilization no longer got worshipped. Was the idea. In fact, most of them believed in many, many gods, and they would worship whoever. But here's God saying, no. You shall have no other gods before me. He's talking to them in language they can understand. God knows there's only one God. God knows that. But he's talking to them in a language that they understand and saying, I know you think that there's all these other ones out there, but you can't put any of them in front of me. And then he says this in verse 4. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. Don't make an image of what you think I look like or any other God looks like. Don't you even think about going and worshiping that thing. These two go hand in hand because all those gods and goddesses that were being worshiped, they all had pictures, they all had statues, they all had something that they all had in some little tabernacle somewhere that people were going and worshiping and offering sacrifices to. God says that's not how this works. And the people of Israel took this very, very seriously, this idea of no idols, no graven images. But when they built the temple, ultimately, they built the space called the Holy of Holies. And this is where God was supposed to be. And no human could go in there except for this high priest once a year. And years later, when a conquering general came through to kind of ransack the temple, he went straight to that space because he knew that's where their God was supposed to be. And he expected to find some big, glorious golden statue that was a picture of their God. And he pulled back the curtain for the Holy of Holies, and there was nothing there. And he was totally, totally shocked. He couldn't believe it. That's how different the people of Israel were. That's how distinct God's people were from the cultures around them. So when God says, don't have any other gods before me, don't make any idols, these are real distinctions. In fact, these are the first two of what we often refer to as the 10 Commandments. If you've ever gone and read exactly where the 10 Commandments are in Exodus chapter 20, you'll go and skip a few lines, and then there's a whole bunch more rules right there. I never know why we call them the 10 Commandments, but these seem to be the 10 that God uses to make Israel distinct and separate and holy as compared to the people around them. So God says, don't put anything else in front of me, don't put anyone else in front of me, and don't try to make an image of me or any other gods that you might worship. There's no room for any other gods, although they believed in them. And what this was called in that day was called monolatry. That's a fancy word for they believed in a multiplicity of gods, but they only worshiped one. This law that you can only worship one, and that there can't be an image of that one or any other ones that are out there, it's ultimately what led to Israel having God remove his hand of protection. Because the people of Israel, if you go and you read through the Hebrew Bible, ultimately they kept falling into this sin of idolatry. They would find out about these other gods and goddesses that sounded really good to them from these nations around them, and they would begin adopting those gods and goddesses into their own spiritual practice. The next thing you know, God's saying, look, he's sending prophets. He's saying, hey, listen, I need you to come back to me. If you're my chosen people, you can't have that stuff. You got to be all about me. No other gods before me. Don't make anything that you think looks like me. Don't do that. If you keep doing this, I'm going to have to remove my hand of protection. And the people of Israel kept doing it. So ultimately, God removed his hand of protection, and the people of Israel were crushed, sold off into slavery, beaten in battle. Years go by, and eventually they start coming back into the land. And by the time Jesus shows up, they're still occupied by a foreign army. In fact, the greatest empire the world had ever known at that point, Rome. And when Jesus comes on the scene and he starts preaching, he's saying a lot of stuff that seems like it's breaking these first two rules that God laid out. People were tired of Rome. They were tired of the Greeks. They were tired of the Persians and the Babylonians before them telling them what they were supposed to do and how they were supposed to live. They were tired of all of that. They wanted to get back to being God's chosen people. And here comes this guy, Jesus, who's claiming to be a Messiah, showing up and saying things like, I'm God's son. See, if you don't know anything else about Jesus, here's what you need to know. He said a few things about him. Now, whether you believe this or not, he said a few things about himself that we all need to keep in mind, because he believed these things about himself, right? So if he was who he said he was, then this is what we know about him, that A, he's God's son, B, he was resurrected, and C, he has authority. So starting off with the first one there, he was God's son. If to say that he was God's son, if he was saying that broke those first two commandments. And the ultimate charge that came up against him was blasphemy. That's what they brought to the table when he went in front of the Sanhedrin after they took him from the Garden of Gethsemane on his last night on earth. They set him in front of this group of leading elders in Jerusalem. The high priest sitting right there, and they make this charge of blasphemy against him. That's ultimately what leads to his crucifixion and death. But if he was who he said he was, then he was God's son, He was resurrected from the dead. He appeared to people, said, God has raised me from the dead, and he has authority. He said, God has given me all authority in heaven and on earth. In other words, he's king. He's the king. Now, I don't know what you believe about Jesus. I don't know if you believe exactly what I believe. I don't know if you believe the Orthodox position or anything like that. I don't know. But what I would encourage you to do is figure out what you believe. Because either Jesus was a liar, or he was a lunatic, or he was who he said he was, the Lord of all, the King of all. He's either a liar, Lord, or lunatic. You choose based on the evidence in front of you. For me, we don't have time to get into all the proofs for the resurrection and all that stuff, but for me, the reason I believe what I believe about Jesus is because I can't shake what happened with everybody after the resurrection. Because it only makes sense to me that you would abandon a guy like Jesus if you were one of the followers there and you were making all of this up. It only makes sense to me. Right? We all have found ourselves kind of getting hyperbolic about things, exaggerating things that happen, right? Like, yeah, I used to be able to dunk, and like really it was on an 8-foot goal you used to be able to dunk, you know? We all exaggerate, and we understand that. This is not an area you can exaggerate. It's got to be pretty black and white, pretty clear cut. Jesus either walked on water and fed thousands of people and then died and was resurrected, or he didn't. All of these people who were following Jesus, and by the way, at this point, it wasn't just the 11 who were left of his original followers. It was hundreds of people. They all started abandoning him and running away. And then within the space of a few weeks, they were all back and leading this growing, quickly, exponentially growing movement. And what they said happened, what changed everything, what brought them back was that they had seen the resurrected Jesus. I don't know what else to do with that. And then this movement goes crazy and starts growing. It's spreading like wildfire. It should have been stopped, but it didn't. The early church understood this, how important the resurrection was to this whole idea. They understood that it was part of what mattered most. And that's why Paul, an early Christian leader who had also had the Lord Jesus appear to him after his resurrection, he wrote this. He said, he, talking about God, raised Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms. Now, so this is metaphorical, okay? Metaphorical. Seated him at his right hand. In those days, the right hand was the place of honor and prestige and authority. Seated him right there in the heavenly realms. Verse 21, far above all rule and authority, power and dominion, and every name that is invoked, not only in the present age, but also in the one to come. So high above anything and everybody else you could ever imagine, God gave him authority and power and prestige and rule over everything and everyone in heaven and on earth and below, anywhere else. God gives that to Jesus through the resurrection, and finally ends up saying, and God placed all things under his feet and appointed him to be head over everything for the church. Everything under his feet. Jesus is king. Jesus has to be king. So friends, if you have said yes to following Jesus, if you decided Jesus is going to be king of my life, then he has to be king. He has to be king in all reality. That means there can be nothing, no one, nothing at all in front of him in your life. Which sounds good until you start thinking about the implications, right? Because that means even family takes a backseat. Jesus himself says, hey, you have to be willing to give up family to follow me. That's hard. The trouble, I think, is that so many of us have allowed ourselves to be coaxed into thinking that because we don't serve a multiplicity of 1,000 gods with little statues everywhere we look, that we aren't tempted to serve these other gods in 21st century America. But that's not entirely true. Because there are a lot of little gods that keep popping up over and over and over in our life. They're just a little bit different than what the ancient Israelites had to face. For instance, things like money. So many people struggle right here with this idea of money. Many of us worship it. Not just the idea of having cold hard cash in our hands or anything like that, but also like what money can give us, what money can do for us. It helps me to have this luxurious lifestyle. I get to go stay at that beach house, or maybe I own that beach house, and I have this house over here that I get to live in with my family that I love, and it's really great, and I get to give them everything I wanted. And if they want to go to college, I can pay for that college just like that. I can dress in the nicest things I can wear. I can wear all the sunglasses I got. I don't have to live in this type of house anymore. I can live in this neighborhood with these people, and we worship money and what it can do for us. Or maybe it's not just money. Maybe for you, it's power. You like the idea that people will do whatever you have told them to do. That they have to follow along and they have to do what you've said to do. Or maybe a bigger one in 21st century American society is sex. We are obsessed with this as a culture. I can't believe the things we put out there in front of very impressionable young children. The things we say. Look, I'm not like super old school or anything. Like, I'm up here in a t-shirt and jeans. I don't know if you noticed, right? I'm not some backwoods super old school guy. But the things we keep putting out and making available to children, 8 years old, who are coming out addicted to pornography, I mean, that should break your heart. I hope it does, because it's messing them up for life. Parents, we're giving our kids cell phones at age 8, 9, just saying, hey, go have fun on this World Wide Web thing where anybody, anywhere can talk to you and show you anything. You can just go off and do whatever you want. And they find all sorts of things, and it messes them up. They have intimacy issues for years and years and years. We let them listen to songs about all this stuff that they're not ready to handle. It's because we worship this idea of sex as being the ultimate fulfillment in life, the thing that will make you happiest, when nothing could be further from the truth. We worship other things like attention. We want the attention of others. We want everybody to look at us and think that I've got it all together. So we curate our online personality with our social media, and we show everybody, oh, look, this is this really cool thing that we did today. Look at little Jimmy. Right, look at this face he made whenever he was making cookies. Don't tell everybody that little Jimmy had to stand there and make that pose about 37 times, right? I want everybody to look at me. I want them to notice me. I want them to think I'm awesome. I want them to think I'm great. And if that's not enough, let's just put it this way. Sometimes we worship ourselves. We want everybody to think that way about us. We want to have all the things we want, and we don't want anybody to be able to say anything about it. The way I use my time is the way I want to use my time. The way I use my money is the way I want to use my money. The way I talk to people is the way I want to talk to people. And we worship ourselves. And we put all of those things in front of Jesus, the one who tried to make a way for us. Friends, if Jesus is king of your life, nothing and no one else should ever get in your way. In fact, that's the bottom line today. If you don't hear anything else, remember this: Jesus must be the only king of your life. The only king. Hear me very clearly. If anything is getting in the way of you following Jesus, get rid of that thing or figure out a way to dominate that thing. Figure out a way to put that thing in its proper place, because Jesus is the only one that can be at the front of that line. Jesus is the only one that's worthy of that. And if you're following Jesus, that's the only way it can work out. And what I'm concerned about is there's so many of us that we think we're following Jesus, but what we're really doing is trying to make ourselves feel better. Because you know the truth. You know the truth about who Jesus is and what Jesus was. You've been convinced by it, but you're not really willing to give up all of yourself yet. If that's you, two things. Stop it, please. Look, I love you, so I tell you. Jesus has to be king. It's not enough just to believe. Jesus had an interaction with somebody and he said, look, that's good for you. Even the demons believe. It's not enough to believe. You have to follow. And the only way you can follow is by making Jesus king. And I wonder for you what that's like, what that looks like in your life. What does it mean for your family? What does it mean for you in the workplace? What does it mean for you online? What does it mean for you as you're driving around? What does it mean as far as your sleep schedule or the way you eat? What does that mean for you? It could change a bunch of things for you when you start thinking about if Jesus is king or not in your life. Because here's what I want to draw you back to. The people of Israel were God's set apart, distinct, and holy people. And if you're a follower of Jesus, if you're somebody who's saying Jesus is king, there's got to be something set apart, distinct, and different about you that looks like Jesus too. And so today, maybe you're hearing some of this for the first time, and you're like, man, I want to follow this Jesus. That I believe he was who he said he was. I believe he was the person, he was the Son of God, and he's been given all authority, and I believe I need to follow him. I need to start doing that right now. I want you to make that commitment today. I'm not going to ask you to come up here and like turn around and let me put anointing oil on you or something like that, make you squawk like a chicken or anything like that. But I want you to make that commitment today, and I want you to tell somebody about it. Pray, tell God, hey, I'm making this commitment. I'm going to follow you with everything I've got. Jesus, you are king. And I want you to tell somebody about that. You can tell me after service. I'll be in the back, and I'd love to talk with you. Or maybe you need to rededicate yourself to making Jesus king. Do it. If there's anything in the way of you making Jesus king of your life, give it up. Run away from that thing. Figure it out. Because there's nothing more important than making Jesus king of your life. Following Jesus is the best way to live and will make you better at life. And just like I said a second ago, make that commitment and tell somebody about it. Let them hold you accountable to it. For now, let me pray for you. God, I thank you for your goodness. I thank you that you are the king and that I am not, because you were wise all the times that I am not. I lift up my brothers and sisters to you, and I pray for them that they would be willing and able to make you king of their life, that they would have the courage and the discipline to follow you with everything they've got. But they'd be willing to look honestly at themselves and determine whether or not they're following you with everything they've got. Or help me. Help me as I try to follow you, to make you king. Lord, we trust you. We love you. We know that you are the only one who is good. Amen. Friends, we make Jesus king because we can trust him. And we know who he is. He's proven it to us. Just like God proved it to the Israelites, Jesus has proven it to us that he's willing to do anything and everything for us. He gave it all. He went to death, even death on a cross for you, for me, for the ones we like and the ones we don't like. He's proven himself. We can trust him. We've got to make him king, because you've got to make king the one person you can trust, and that's King Jesus.